No Politic Here.
Welcome back to the first ever episode of No Politic Here with Isaac, that's me, of the YouTube channel Overzealots, and my brilliant and extraordinarily handsome co-host, Chris Kunzler of the YouTube channel Chris Kunzler. And if you're curious about how you are being welcomed back to a show that is just now starting, then you're asking the right questions. You're a thinker, and we appreciate you. Chris, what's up?
Not much. Very happy to be here alongside my brilliant and highly educated and incredibly strong co-host. You know,
I don't know about that.
Doing incredible things in the YouTube space, returning to a podcast that has never happened before. So
yeah,
always exciting. I'm generally very excited, and I guess maybe we could briefly outline what we're going to do, which is sort of a current event style podcast where we also talk about history and the context of why events are happening. And this has always sort of been what I've been interested in with social media and stuff, because anyone can give sort of boring opinions about the news or just read out headlines. But what I think makes what we do interesting is kind of trying to look at things through a leftist perspective in their history.
Yeah. I guess what people can expect from the show would be like a general anti-imperialist lens of analysis. We'll talk about the current events. We'll try and place them in context, relate them to historical events that are maybe analogous or can offer some more insight. And we'll have fun. That's what we do over here. We have fun. Do you want to go over some of the names that people suggested that we didn't end up choosing?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to steal it from you, but my favorite, of course, was Serving Kunz. And there was, although I like it and think it's funny, there's absolutely no way I would call a podcast with a co-host on Serving Kunz. I said this when someone said it instantly. It's like, sorry, this just makes it sound like you're sort of my servant.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, dude. I'm totally fine with it. I would have like a little dish that I would be like giving to you like this.
Yeah,
I'd be super cool with it.
Yeah, I mean, that would make for maybe great art, but aside from that, no.
Could you, that's another thing we tried to keep in mind was if we're ever pitching the show to like an academic or someone who's like serious, not that like you're not serious, I'm not serious, but you're serious.
I don't know.
But if we were like pitching to like an academic and we had to be like, yeah, the show is called like Serving Kunz, I don't know how receptive they would be.
I would just assume that most older academics would be like, this is a very sort of dominant podcast name to have with two co-hosts, you know? But, you know, I don't think they would probably... one. Yeah, I don't think they'd probably understand or appreciate like the meme at all, but, you know...
Yeah.
Maybe they'd love it.
Yeah, I mean, you stole that one from me. I had that on my list of names I was going to shout out. The next one was Zealotry Condensed, but it's spelled like condensed. So I was like, a lot of these names are just like the puns of both of our names. At first I was kind of leaning toward maybe accepting a pun, but again, the same thing applied. I was worried about pitching to academics.
Yeah, I think also a lot of the puns around my name relate to a word that the YouTube algorithm and monetization system really does not like, even though it doesn't have anywhere near the connection or sort of meaning that it does in America. Like one of the first times sort of hearing it used as like a demeaning misogynist slur. The connotation was the word I'm looking for. But anyway, one of the only times I've heard it used like that is from The Sopranos. You know, in the UK, it's sort of more of a term of endearment. You don't really specifically use it against women, but yeah, YouTube doesn't like that one. So I feel like all of the people who were sort of recommending things like puns like that on my name, not the best of ideas, but thanks anyway.
Are you a big Sopranos guy?
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
I love this. You know, on my research desk, I have a little figurine of Tony Soprano right next to a figurine of Ho Chi Minh, my two goats.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably have AJ there. He gets pretty woke towards the final seasons when he starts talking about Israel and Palestine.
Dude.
But yeah, I think some other wicked ones was someone just suggesting the name Grade A Under A, which, do you know who that is?
No.
Grade A Under A is just like another YouTuber who's been in the space for like years and years and years. I don't know much about him. I feel like he's probably, I don't know, not the greatest of people, but either way, just thanks for the recommendation of just someone else's
steal
name.
Their shit. Yeah.
Yeah, or leftovers. Amazing one. I'm sure that
I I wonder if the IP is still in use. We could probably could have taken it.
I feel like with how litigious Mr. Klein is, it might not be the best idea, but, you know, it might be worth it. Maybe he'd finally talk about us.
True. Look at that, 4D chess.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if you saw this one, but this was recommended under my like YouTube tab post. And it's Mayo Men of Virtue.
No, I didn't see that.
And the best part was, I believe it was like in a list of very serious names, and then just one of them was Mayo Men of Virtue. It's like, this is ridiculous.
Okay, I mean, I like that one, but probably isn't one I'd want to choose or use for this podcast.
I mean, it's better than Mayo Men of Vice. So
exactly,
I'll take that.
Yeah. There were some others, like the Bread Line, which I thought was not a bad name, but
yeah, that was cool.
Just thought if I was hosting a podcast called The Bread Line, and, you know, like my accent and sort of my upbringing, I'd feel like a bit like maybe it doesn't really fit with sort of me, and people would not like that as much over the time. And so I guess, you know, the those were sort of like comical ones. I mean, I really did like the kind of runner-up that we went for, the one that we both agreed, the Gramsci quote.
Right. Yeah. Now time for monsters, like the play on the Gramsci quote. But yeah, unfortunately, it's in use. A very similar version of it is in use by another podcast. I can't remember the name of the host, but yeah, that was brought to our attention.
I've actually seen Gramsci's grave.
Really?
Yeah, it's in Rome. The first time I met my girlfriend, the second day we were there in Rome, we went to see Gramsci's grave. It's actually really, really beautiful,
Chris,
the cemetery.
I have to ask you, why are you Italiophobic?
It's only Sardinians, because they're troublesome people.
They're
Italians generally.
I have Sardinian family. I mean, I'm not like, they like through marriage, but
Oh, okay. No.
Close enough.
I actually really like Italy. I thought it was a lovely place when I was there, and I like the Italians. It's just funny. I don't know. Italians are always getting up to crazy shit, whether that's The Sopranos or shooting CEOs. You know, there's quite a mixture of Italian society in America.
That's fair. It's okay. I'll accept your Italian bigotry. I've not been the friendliest to the Brits throughout my lifetime, so it's an even playing field. You are an exceptional British man. I will give you that.
It seems to be that way. I feel like the bar is just, and this kind of maybe, I don't know if you have the same experience, but the bar is just generally so low for white people with platforms on the internet that, you know, most people are pretty surprised when you say something that isn't like, I think all immigrants should be removed from the country. So, you know.
Yeah, it's like a ridiculously low bar. Yeah. So you want to start? You want to get into the first thing we're going to talk about, which I believe is the Trump plan, the Trump-Gaza peace plan.
Yeah, and I mean, when we kind of discussed how we were going to talk about this, I think what's really important to think about is kind of the things that have happened over the last year and how this plan has sort of evolved. Because obviously Trump came in on this whole ticket of, I'm going to make peace in the Middle East, I'm going to make peace all over the world. He's failed at the main two examples and then just generally seems to be inflating other examples. For example, India and Pakistan, where the Indians said he didn't do anything, but the Pakistanis were like, yeah, he's amazing. Clearly because they realized the smarter option is just to flatter him because he'll listen. But yeah, I mean, today I was watching sort of clips of what Trump had previously said, and it was just unbelievable that I'd kind of forgotten that, you know, about just under a year ago, he was sat with the King of Jordan, and he said in front of him that they were potentially going to cut off aid to Jordan and Egypt unless they took in the Palestinians.
Insane, dude. I don't know if I want to jog your memory back to like a super dark place or anything, but I have something to show you.
Okay.
Donald's coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden.
As you can see, this Trump plan had some very humble beginnings with this this godly statue of Donald Trump in made out of gold.
Yeah. I think also what's kind of amazing about this video is, first of all, obviously the song is, incredible, and the fact that this is not copyrighted and was produced by AI really shows you that musicians have to be worried about the future,
Dude.
But
yeah.
Yes, you especially. I mean, I don't think if you worked your entire life, you'd never produce anything as masterful as Trump
there's no
Gaza.
chance.
But I think what was really interesting even about this video, aside from obviously, Donald Trump's inflated ego and his sort of him being a maniac, especially around this time, like once again going back to the fact that he literally was saying, I will cut off all aid to Egypt and Jordan unless they are willing to take Palestinians, something which probably was floated very early on and wasn't really actually that much of a Trump policy, just practicality realized you can't do that. But it's really amazing how Orientalist this video is, that it contains like a load of bizarre tropes, but also some sort of semi-woke ones. Like the AI is clearly not that good because there are male bearded belly dancers.
Oh, right. I didn't even... Where is that?
It's very near the start. So there's very near the start. And I mean, Elon Musk raining money as well. So it's probably about... There.
Here we go. Dude.
Yeah, it's amazing. I don't really understand. I think it just does make you wonder what the prompts are, because, I'm generating this kind of shit in my spare time, but, I'm not using prompts about Gaza. That's all I'll say. But yeah, it was a really unusual video, and I think that it is worth kind of like looking at, because the things that have gone on since that point and have changed really show you sort of how, first of all, much of a maniac Donald Trump is, and just generally his like idiocy, the idea that, I'd say that the core difference between him and Biden is Biden probably would have been happy with doing this, but what limited Biden and every other official around him was telling him never ever utter those words because they're a diplomatic nightmare, and also because you could not cut off aid and support to two countries, Jordan, who have been a key Western ally since the inception of the regime, and Egypt. And also both of these regimes are very important for Israel's Israel's occupation. Jordan shares security information, and Egypt is very happy to crack down on Hamas because they're an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so I think looking back at this is really interesting, and seeing this time of Trump saying many different things and producing stuff like this. And then, this kind of all goes away because it's totally impractical.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see how that I would say like the delusion has evolved into essentially like a colonial effort now. And funnily enough, he's brought Egypt and Jordan on board to be part of this transitional body to consult the apolitical Palestinian committee that is going to be taking over in Gaza.
100%, like, this apolitical body that's meant to be coming in. But even then, there's some shaky things. There was some commentary from King Abdullah of Jordan where he said, we don't want to be running around the Gaza Strip with guns. He was like, no one will actually want to be put part of an international security force that is going to be enforcing peace rather than upholding, I think was the terminology he used, to basically say, if we're there with guns and we're fighting against Hamas, no one is going to do this because of the legitimacy the lack of legitimacy that they'll get from it. And so it's kind of, there's still many complex questions. But I guess, how the plan has evolved is to the 20-point plan, I believe, that we got in a few months ago, that was basically the end and eventually was signed and has just been put into place by a UN resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 20-point plan, but there are things that I think are worth talking about, the things that stick out to me the most. First of which would be the creation of an international transitional body called the Board of Peace, which is to be headed by Trump and staffed with other members like Tony Blair, and tasked with advising an apolitical Palestinian committee that will be governing Gaza. Now, I don't understand any reality in which a governance structure in the wake of occupation and genocide could ever be apolitical. So that's right away not making any sense to me. Denying the Palestinians the governance that they desire is inherently a political endeavor. But I guess it sounds better when you write a political Palestinian committee in your plan.
Completely. And I mean, I think another point that also looking at this sort of trajectory that we've seen over the last few months, I think a point that also really sticks out to me is point 12, which is talking about how no one will be forced to leave Gaza and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and that they can also return. At certain points, Trump said, first of all, no one will return. He was talking about buying the Gaza Strip at a certain point, and then he said, actually, no one will buy it because it's war-torn and there's nothing to buy, which, I mean, it is true because Gaza is torn to shreds, but the whole plan is bizarre. It's not really sensical, and it kind of thus is clearly a very... It clearly is something that is not that different from the history of what has happened in Palestine, you know, and what we'll talk about in this episode, how Western governments have had lofty ideas about what's going to happen in Palestine, but have clearly never been able to do anything because they're not serious. And this is not a serious plan. You know, we've seen some of it met already, but it just kind of has very complex questions that are answered with very simple solutions that aren't reflective of what anyone wants on the ground.
Yeah, it's really reflective of the long-standing logic of imposing Israeli and Western will and imposing Israeli Western sanctioned governance structures onto the Palestinians and just sidestepping their genuine and respectable political aspirations. I don't know if you want to get into this now, but I think it's worth mentioning because we brought up Tony Blair, as he will be, you know, part of the board that Trump is concocting. Do you want to get into how he was revealed to be meeting with Netanyahu multiple times back in 2024? Was it 2024?
Yeah. So this is actually something that has emerged semi-recently, which is that, you know what, I think it's worth prefacing this by saying Tony Blair is probably one of the most sensical people that has been floated for the board, only because he has some experience in the Middle East. Not to say that he's a good guy or anything of that sort, but I mean, some of the others are just like businessmen. There are people who were allegedly on the Department of Governmental Efficiency, Elon Musk's, you know, very grandiose thing of apparently saving Americans billions of dollars, which seemingly has materialized into nothing. And now apparently these people are meeting and having discussions about a Gaza cryptocurrency and plans for no traffic. And so it's, you know, this is clearly a real meeting of minds and some very clever people who really should be deciding the future of 2 million Palestinians. But I think kind of when we're talking about Blair, he was revealed to have met Netanyahu, I believe, 7 times was the exact number. And I think that this is also kind of something that is troubling in the sense of basically since Blair went out of power in the UK after his terms as Prime Minister, he went and enriched himself considerably and then eventually founded the Tony Blair Institute, which is his kind of like, it's like a think tank. And the think tank is very heavily funded by Larry Ellison. And Larry Ellison is a figure who is touted, or it seemingly has not yet fully gone through, but will quite likely be the man buying TikTok and is engaged in a huge media takeover that is probably worth talking about in a different episode. It is so large.
Yeah.
And this is
might
the
be
guy
wrong, but is he the one he's involved in Paramount as well right now, or am I thinking of someone else?
I think that's David Ellison, who is his son. And so that I may be wrong on that topic, but it is a very large media takeover. And so it's kind of a very troubling thing that, you know, we're basically seeing Tony Blair, who is a guy who is funded by Larry Ellison. His think tank has received hundreds of millions of dollars, which is very odd for a British think tank. Most of them are not receiving anywhere near that kind of money. And he will now, or he is the only figure that we've really had fully confirmed to lead the Gaza Peace Board. And it's just unbelievable, really. And I think already it kind of reveals that this is not being done in good faith, and the fact that the UN passed anything related to this and the Security Council did it is an abomination. But I think that was also part of, if you listen to, I believe it's Mike Waltz, who's Trump's ambassador to the UN, he was saying if you don't sign it, it's a vote for a return to the war, it's a vote for a return to it's a vote for Hamas, basically. And so anyone who wasn't going to sign up to it, anyone who vetoed it, was going to be framed as, oh, look, they're basically backing Hamas. They're the ones entirely responsible for the genocide. We had amazing peace with Trump. Sorry, excuse me. And so I think what you're kind of looking at with Blair is a really horrible situation. And as I say, the fact that he is like probably the person with the best expertise amongst the people doing it is troubling because of who he is, you know?
Well, I mean, if I was going to occupy a strip of land in the Middle East and engage in, speculative endeavors, construction and whatnot, I would probably like to bring Tony Blair, maybe Dick Cheney back from the grave and, get them involved. I mean, those are the ones who know what they're doing. They've done it before.
Rip Cheney and Kissinger, they would have loved seeing this.
Yeah, it's truly a tragedy. They died before they could see what their legacy has metastasized into.
Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about that. The planned division of Gaza into the green zone and the red zone. And we had a conversation off air about this. The construction efforts are going to be limited to the green zone. And the red zone is just going to be left in ruins. And I believe that's where Hamas is to be relegated. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's where so that's Hamas. Hamas are operating inside those areas and are already pretty clearly doing somewhat of a successful job at reconstituting. Because I mean, almost instantaneously, we saw all of the executions of alleged collaborators, and I mean, obviously, there's the alternatives to them lack popular legitimacy, and so I think that part of the thing is, well, we'll do reconstruction. But even then, this reconstruction effort is so complex and so difficult because, first of all, there's most likely well over 10,000 people who are buried in the rubble. And as much as the Israelis and probably the Americans would just like to do whatever with them, you can't really do that. So they're going to have to come up with some way with dealing with all these huge amounts of mangled bodies that have been left to rot and have been crushed by buildings. And also the fact that I think it's 50 million tons of rubble is in the Gaza Strip, and 2 million tons of that is asbestos contaminated. There are huge amounts of unexploded bombs and things within them. And already we've seen consequences of this, of people being harmed by explosives that are just left there in Gaza, and it's not an oddity in war, In Lebanon, hundreds of people have died since 2006 as a result of cluster munitions.
Yeah.
And so
Vietnam.
Vietnam,
Laos,
Cambodia, Angola,
yeah.
all of these places, where people died long after a ceasefire. And I think that this plan is so fanciful, but I guess, what you're wanting to talk about here is why it exists. It's about division, right? Is what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, I do want to get into that. We have like a whole segment planned for division, how the Israelis have made it a concerted effort to fragment Palestinians wherever they may exist in a cluster, in a group, as a attempt to weaken their ability to resist. Before I get into that, though, there is a few other things I wanted to talk about the actual 20-point peace plan. Another thing that I thought was really important, and I don't want to forget it, so I'm just going to say it now. It states in the plan that the transitional apparatus is to remain in place until the PA has, quote, completed its reform program and can securely take back control of Gaza. It's worth mentioning that this is another example of, the PA, corrupt collaborationist force, being pushed onto the Palestinians as the only acceptable governance structure, sanctioned by the West, sanctioned by Israel. Trump has called for an international stabilization force to immediately deploy to Gaza. And, this force is meant to just stay there until the PA can take over. So this is another blatant, hand-waving away of the Palestinians' aspirations.
Right, totally. And I mean, the Palestinian Authority are a horrifying institution.
Yeah, incredibly corrupt.
And the funny thing is that the Palestinian Authority since their inception have had problems with corruption, but the main thing about the Palestinian Authority is they do basically everything that Israel has asked of them throughout their history. They crack down on Hamas in the West Bank. They did this throughout the late 2000s and early 2010s, arrested thousands of people, people like imams who gave sermons that were allegedly too pro-resistance, too pro-Hamas. They cracked down on charities, things that they claimed were financing Hamas. It was totally extrajudicial, but they did it in the name of Israel. And apparently this organization still needs more reform. I mean, there's a really striking video of Lieutenant General Keith Dayton, who was a significant American general. And what he said was of the Palestinian Authority, we have created new men here. He spoke about how Israelis and Americans would come to him and say, look at the amazing work that you've done. And the funny thing is that as they trained more with the Americans, they became even worse violators of human rights. They killed a critic in 2020, Nizar Banat. And yeah, they're an awful institution.
Mm-hmm. There's a book, it's called The Roadmap to Nowhere by Tanya Reinhardt, and she goes over this. She talks about how the PA has cracked down on its own citizens, received training by Israeli forces trained by the CIA. So, I mean, there is a reason why Hamas won in the elections and not Fatah, right? So if we don't get to the root as to why the popular sentiment teetered toward Hamas at the time, and not the PA, not the PLO or Fatah. It was Fatah back then. I think it's important to get to the root of that before we start assuming that, we can just throw the Palestinian Authority over in Gaza and the Palestinians in Gaza are going to just accept it. I think there's this thing, specifically in the West, where as long as you can say that there are Arabs working alongside whatever the U.S. or Israeli sanctioned plan may be, then a lot of Westerners will think, okay, Palestinians are Arabs, the actors involved are Arab, so it must be a fair plan. And in specific, when it comes to this international stabilization force that is set to deploy in Gaza, it's meant to consult specifically with Egypt and Jordan. And Egypt and Jordan are two governments that have sold out the Palestinians long ago. They're U.S. allies. What's the point in highlighting their Arabness if they don't have the Palestinians' best intentions at heart?
They're also dictatorships, which is like the funny thing of all of this, which is, everyone knows it was a lie that we were going to spread democracy all around the world and stuff, and that's really gone away, that kind of notion. But very often people condition their support for Israel on the basis of, well, they're democratic and blah, 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 but then seemingly just possess like a blank spot. And I think as leftists, that's something that we should always be focusing on, that the vast majority of these regimes around Israel don't need defending. They're authoritarian. They are collaborators with Israel. They do nothing about the suffering of Palestinians. They crack down on their own populations, and they're not changing. They're becoming more authoritarian. And so I think like people just see, King Abdullah or Sisi is like, I like this plan, and that's just it for them. They're like, well, it must be legitimate. And they've always wanted that. Like, it's always been a thing of American politicians going and lobbying and checking whether, the Saudi king says, yep, that's a good plan, or whether whoever would say it, especially post-1970, really, where you've had, these regimes that are less anti-Israel and anti-West.
Exactly. To get back to what we were talking about, the concerted effort to divide and separate and fragment Palestinians in the hopes to prevent any sort of effective resistance. This is actually open Israeli policy. There's the Deputy Defense Minister, Danny Dadan, back in 2014 said explicitly, he said, starting in the summer of 2007, following the takeover of the Gaza Strip by terrorist organizations, Israel has been implementing a separation policy between the Gaza Strip and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. This policy is backed by the decisions of the government of Israel. So this is an open, admitted to Israeli policy to separate, to fragment the Palestinians. And knowing that this is the logic that they operate with, when we see, military documents stating that they plan to divide Gaza into this red zone, this green zone, reconstruct only the green zone, who knows who's going to end up getting extremely rich off of those reconstruction efforts, and relegate the Palestinians to the red zone, which is to be left in ruins. This is, for those who pick up on these patterns, this looks like a perfect manifestation of this Israeli policy of separation and fragmentation.
Yeah, I mean, and even in that, like, Palestinians have a very hard choice as to what they're going to do, because if you're stuck in an area that's not getting the aid, that's not being rebuilt, and blah, 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 all of this stuff that's going to make your life impossible, what is your choice? To then go and live? Because obviously people in Palestine make hard choices about living in their land because they don't want their identity and their culture to be taken away from them by the Zionist project. And so, people have to make this choice of, do I stay in this area, or do I go and live in an area where I might be able to better provide for my family? But even then, there are very serious questions around this, because what they're thinking about, and what was discussed in the New York Times apparently about what might happen, is they're thinking about using kind of like the shelters that were used during the Turkish earthquake that can be kind of quickly built, but apparently they may cost tens of millions of dollars per shelter. There are discussions about whether Palestinians will be allowed to leave. There are questions of who will be policing them. Will it be Israeli soldiers? Will it be these clans? Because, will that work with Palestinians who don't want to be near them? And so I think that there's like a lot of questions around this, of like what we're going to see and whether it will even work. And I kind of am inclined to believe that it won't work.
Yeah, and ultimately it brings us back to what I guess is the thesis of this episode, which is peace without Palestinians, right? Mm-hmm. The ability or the desire to impose some sort of settlement that is favorable mostly to Israel and its Western allies, and completely ignore the Palestinians, often just not even involve them in the talks, as, we've seen with, the Security Council Resolution 242 back in 1967. That's something that passed to Palestinian disapproval, and they didn't really approve it until the late 80s. We also saw it with Camp David in 78, if you want to go into that.
Yeah. I mean, Camp David was kind of premised on this idea of something that came from Kissinger, really. Kissinger was like, we can't really have any kind of contact with the PLO until they accept Israel's right to exist. And the reason that the PLO apparently wouldn't abandon this in the 70s was because they were like, we'll do it if you 100% guarantee that we will get a state. And yet they were framed as like monstrous evil terrorists. Yeah. The Israelis actually used very similar discursive propaganda. There's a story about how in Preventing Palestine by Seth Anziska, about how Cyrus Vance, who was, I believe, the Secretary of State to Jimmy Carter, went to Israel with her husband, and Menachem Begin, at the dinner that they were having, got up and gave a speech where he held up the PLO charter and was like, they want to destroy Israel, they're genociders, they're Nazis. This was told to her over and over again because the Israeli government wanted to make clear, no, you can't have peace because the PLO are the representatives of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And we're seeing exactly the same kind of thing today, where Palestinians are being circumvented. And this is really problematic as well, because part of the logic of October the 7th was basically the decline of the Palestinian issue and the fact that there was potential of normalization between, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all of these countries who'd previously conditioned normalization on the idea of a recognition of a Palestinian state. I mean, the UAE, even when they signed the Abraham Accords, made up a lie and said they'd stopped Israeli annexation of the West Bank.
Yeah,
it wasn't
and then
true.
The day they signed it, Netanyahu, I believe, he went back on his word and he said that he was going to continue building the settlements.
Exactly. And so I think that like all of this factors into this kind of history of trying to make peace without the Palestinians. And the main problem with this is it doesn't address the issue of the core issues. A Palestinian state, if you are a two-stater, or, anyone who believes in Palestinians having any right to dignity, and also other issues like Jerusalem, refugees, settlements in the West Bank.
Right of return.
Exactly. And we're kind of seeing this framed by Trump and the sycophants around him as like the deal of the century peace, as he always loves to frame his peace.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't address any problem. And it's the same issue that Camp David had, that they made, this bilateral peace with Egypt, and it didn't address the problems. It didn't even really address Israeli problems, because Egyptians didn't warm to Israelis.
Popular sentiment is against the normalization efforts in all of these countries, in all of the Gulf states. The popular sentiment is not to normalize with Israel. And yeah, like in Camp David, Begin, he explicitly said that he didn't want the PLO present for negotiations even though one of the frameworks, I believe it was the Framework for Peace in the Middle East, explicitly dealt with the Palestinian plight. So these are people making up solutions for a group of people who aren't invited to the negotiations. And, that's something that we still see to this day. If you want to get into the Abraham Accords, maybe briefly what they are, and the normalization efforts and how that pertains to maybe hyper-focusing on economic relations between Israel and maybe hitherto adversarial Arab states, and how by focusing on those economic relationships, the Palestinian plight has been completely sidelined. Political solutions have been sidelined for economic ones.
Yeah, I think that there's so much to really say about the Abraham Accords. In fact, maybe one day they're an entire episode. But the Abraham Accords are so interesting because they tap into this legacy of Camp David of, kind of making peace without Palestinians and pretending that kind of all issues with the Middle East will be addressed this way. And even though they're kind of like a Trump champion thing that were largely done through back channels by Tom Barak, and I mean, we mentioned this, who was a close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who was also doing back channels with these countries, so maybe he had some kind of role. I guess we'll maybe never know, but either way, so they're basically these agreements that are brokered between, I think the first countries that we get are the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain. So Bahrain is a country that is ruled by the Khalifa regime, which are a dictatorial monarchy that the population don't like. And you kind of noted how the Gulf countries don't like them. Elham Fakhro is someone who we've spoken about, and she is one of the best authors on this. She talked about how a really interesting thing is that since October the 7th, in Bahrain, civil society has taken up things like the Starbucks boycott, but we're kind of meant to just, or made to believe in the West, that these sort of horrible dictatorial authoritarians are building a new, wonderful peace in the Middle East because they're kind of dealing with the Islamist extremists like Hamas who have just ruined things. But what these accords totally discredit, and why we should be so against them, is because they're not addressing actual issues of people on the ground. They're not reflective of people's opinions on the ground. And part of what has got us into these problems up to this day is ignoring the plight of the Palestinians and continually kicking the can down the road. The two-state solution could have been reached at a multitude of different points, and often the Palestinians are blamed, but, their basis is on the two-state. It's okay, uphold international law, Israel, and then Israel is like, no, we need more concessions.
Well,
and so
the 2001 Arab Peace Initiative, all it really asked of Israel was to uphold international law, to stop occupying territories they were illegally occupying, and to allow for a Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem. This was a very liberal Zionist solution. It was a two-state solution, and Israel just outright rejected it. So
yes, and so the Abraham Accords are much more of like these countries being like, okay, we just want trade relations with Israel, and also security relations, and that's obviously beneficial to Israel because many of these countries share a similar enemy with Israel in not just their propaganda, but also, their fears about what might happen, which is, yes, Iran. Iran is the sort of big baddie of the Middle East, and by creating a unified front against Iran, particularly as relations had warmed a little, especially towards the end of the Obama administration with the nuclear agreement, these countries were like, okay, well, we'll do our own thing, which is kind of strike peace deals with Israel. And obviously what they got in return in the context of and they're very transactional, as all Trump deals are. So in the context of Morocco, their sovereignty over the Western Sahara was recognized.
Yeah, recognized. Sudan had their debts paid off by the, in exchange for them to join the Abraham Accords.
And they were removed as a state sponsor of terror. So these kind of things for like a country like Sudan, where, by the way, the population of Sudan were really against this. And now you have all of these sort of fake leftists who glob onto Sudan, who've been like admonishing people for talking about Palestine over the last year and are globbing on and being like, why does no one care about this? The Sudanese people said categorically, no, we don't want this. These deals were cut by the generals who are warring currently. Hamedati is someone who Israel has, not stayed that far away from realistically. And so I think that people need to stop kind of fantasizing about this wonderful, peaceful Middle East that does away with the concept of Palestinian liberation and kind of accommodates Israeli security and whatever nonsense, and really take a hard look at these are dictatorial regimes cutting wholly unpopular deals with Israel so they can get security, so they can get
weapons,
some benefits for themselves,
intelligence,
weapons. Exactly,
energy.
exactly.
energy as well. Like UAE owns part of Israel's Tamar gas field, right?
I didn't know that, but yeah, I mean, quite possibly. Really?
Yeah, I believe
well,
so.
I mean, these countries have inordinate amounts of wealth to throw around, and they love investing in Western companies, and the Israelis are pretty good at one thing, which is making surveillance technology that they test and use on Palestinians that is then sold to authoritarian regimes who since 2011 have been very panicked about their people rising up. And this is kind of the nexus of this horrible thing that's going on.
Well, that's something worth highlighting too for people who may be confused as to why there's this relationship between these Gulf monarchies and Israel, and the Arab Spring plays a big role in that because they feared a democratic uprising threatening the status quo of the Middle East, and they all shared those worries. The Gulf monarchs, Israel is a very repressive form of government as well. And if you see a successful, if you see the Arab Spring and you see people uprising, you're going to form these unholy alliances to prevent that from happening in your country.
100%. And largely the only reason that Israel is supported as a democracy, or, that Israel exists as a democracy in the Middle East, is because it is always guaranteed to return someone who is going to be pro-West, because Israel's interests align entirely with Western nations. Although, there may be friction over the extremity of Israeli policies and their seeming total unwillingness to just make even a peace solution where the Palestinians are totally subordinate to them, the fact remains that, these dictatorial Arab nations are terrified of their populations rising up, and so they're going to want surveillance tech. They're going to want a strong Israel.
Yeah, I believe it's Bahrain. They're using, well, not just Bahrain, but they're a notable example of this, using Israeli surveillance tech to crack down on their own population. Before I forget, in 2021, the Emirati firm Mubadala Energy bought 22% stake in Israel's Tamar offshore gas field. Egypt and Jordan are deeply integrated, these are my notes, having signed multi-billion-dollar Israeli gas import deals in the 2010s that have only intensified. I mean, yeah, these are examples of these normalization efforts, the hyper-focus on economic transaction to sidestep and to just pull the focus away from the Palestinian political issues.
And also to kind of, I think, demonize the Palestinian cause is something that maybe we should probably keep in our minds, that many of these nations are framing themselves as religious, tolerant, amazing nations. Abu Dhabi has a huge, the UAE, I don't actually know if it's in Abu Dhabi, it probably is, has huge synagogues. It has this very weird interfaith center that you can look up that's Christian, Jewish, Muslims all living together in wonderful, happy peace, whilst they frame Hamas and Palestinians as radical extremists for desiring liberation and challenging the status quo that has prevailed for too long in the Middle East of brutal dictatorial regimes. Bahrain is atrocious, and yet it is framed as this, in Trump's vision, and also people like Biden, remember he was pushing for Saudi normalization. It is framed as this wonderful future for the Middle East, but this is a country that was imprisoning dissidents, was cracking down on people. And I think that this nexus of these dictatorial states, we have to bear in mind that, yes, these charges can be levied against many of the groups like the Houthis. The Houthis are not Democrats at all, Hezbollah, Iran, but these charges apply for all of these Western-backed countries. And so kind of this vision of a new Middle East with all these amazing interfaith tolerant countries is ridiculous. It doesn't address the problems of the Palestinians, and circumventing them is as leftists something that we should 100% challenge, because the Palestinian liberationary struggle is one for dignity. It is one for a different Middle East that is being denied by Israel and these dictatorial regimes.
Dude, I don't know if you saw this, but this was one of the funny narratives that Emirati officials were trying to push pertaining to the Abraham Accords. They were saying that these normalization efforts are going to be good because Emiratis will have a chance to go pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's because they're trying to push it as though it's this push for tolerance and respect of cultures. And they're like, guys, you're going to be able to go pray the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But in the end of the day, it's business. It's business dealings, business transactions.
Yeah, the tiny population of actual people who are from the Emirates, and maybe they will get to go pray there, but at the same time, I'm sure that many of them would still be subjected to racism and violence and things,
the Emirati
things to that
public,
effect.
Emirati public at large has not been on board. They have not embraced normalization.
Yeah, and I think that this is kind of like why I find all of these visions so fanciful, as I say, because we're not addressing the problems of the Palestinians, you know, much in the same way that the agreement with Egypt, and I guess this is why it's so important to talk about the historical context. This is not something new. This is not something amazing and fanciful. There are things to talk about it as kind of like a shift within the Middle East, but like at the same time, it has historical precedent in failed peace deals that are not addressing the real problems of the Middle East.
Yeah. They failed for the Palestinians. They succeeded for Israel in the West, and a lot of people got rich.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Did you look into this IMEC thing, this India, Middle East, Europe corridor?
No.
So basically, it's a plan. It's like a trade and like logistics network that's going to start in Southeast Asia and go through the Gulf, through Israel, and then go to Europe. It's like a trade network type thing. And Gaza is envisioned in this plan to serve as a logistics hub. And it's a very clear example of the logic of the Abraham Accords, just trying to get these countries to embrace like an economic agreement. And by doing that, maybe they'll, forget about the Palestinian political aspirations.
Yeah, and these are, the countries who are interested in this. Apparently the tolerant, wonderful countries are the ones currently tearing apart Sudan, currently who tore apart Egypt when it actually got democracy in 2013, who have destabilized Libya, who have continually backed separatists in Yemen. There are so many contexts in which the UAE is just engaged in like proxy wars and attempts to gain key ports for this like sort of logistics and vision that it has for the region. Like as I mentioned to you earlier, through by having like an effective proxy in Yemen, you get access to part of the Red Sea. By having Haftar, who's their sort of military strongman in Libya, you get access to the Mediterranean. And you can get access to they've bought up huge swathes of forests in Africa for carbon credits. They are really coming to dominate the like new Middle East, but it's not in a positive way.
No, and like even going back to IMEC, the way that it's being branded is that it's going to be this green trade network. It's going to bring these countries together. It's going to embrace tolerance, blah, blah, blah. But it's very obvious that each country involved has a specific geopolitical goal. Like the U.S. is trying to use it to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, and like lock India and the Gulf firmly into the Western camp. The EU is going to get like a secure trade bridge, so they get to avoid the Red Sea, they get to avoid the Suez choke points. India is going to boost manufacturing, which is something that they've been trying to do, be like a global export hub. The Gulf states get to like rebrand into this like logistics energy hub. And Israel is like the central node. Actually, there was a port privatized in Israel that is now controlled by an Indian group. So now India owns the ports on the Indian side, and they own a port in Israel, or have like a stake in a port in Israel. So this is a project where people are going to the elites are going to get extraordinarily wealthy. They're going to frame it as though it's like this green deal is going to bring people together, blah, blah, blah. And once again, the Palestinians are left in the dust. Gaza is going to be turned into a logistics port.
Yeah, and I believe that I've definitely read this somewhere, but where one of the reasons that Sadat signed the Camp David Accords, which Anwar Sadat, the leader of Egypt, obviously at that time, was because Egypt was in dire economic straits, and he knew he'd get relief if he did it. He knew that he would be welcomed much closer to the West, brought in, into the fold. Like, this is just for some elites. And the problem is too many people are like giving credit to this, are thinking, things will be fine, and we've got to just think that this is all there'll ever be. But ignoring the Palestinians hasn't worked for decades. And I think that one of the most troubling aspects for me about all of that is perhaps it leads to really what I think Israel is moving closer towards, which is the end game of not just doing politics without the Palestinians, but just doing away with them. Because, all of this stuff with Gaza and rebuilding it, as we kind of started with, it's complex, it's not simple. So what's going to happen? Are they going to just expel en masse Palestinians? It's being discussed. It's not that outlandish to say anymore. And it's hard. It's really hard to know what's going to happen. Trump says one thing and he changes and he flip-flops around. And so I think that we're kind of looking at like an interesting situation of what will develop. And people need to be more aware of like this Gulf and Emirati kind of influence in the region. And so I think that kind of like one of the final things that I wanted to talk about as well is the mandates as racism is what we kind of thought of this topic as. Now, the reason that I say this is because appointing foreign politicians from, Western society as the board controlling Gaza really does hark back to a very similar period, which was
we've seen
the
it.
mandate era.
Before.
Yeah, and it worked brilliantly that time. It didn't produce like the longest standing conflict, if you want to use that term, in the Middle East. Like, they were told
no
over
externalities.
And over again. No,
it worked great.
They were told, don't bring... And actually, it's not just Palestine. It is basically all over where they set up terrible political systems that have far-reaching consequences to this very day. But the mandates were very much, repackaged colonialism even at the time. The mandates were unpalatable to many people. They were never going to be done in Europe. But what they were premised on was the basic idea that, unlike colonialism that had no definitive endpoint, that the mandates would democratize people, that they would help shepherd and develop the backwards and uncivilized societies of the Middle East and make them all good and acceptable by, cultivating an elite within the country. Palestine sits as a bizarre exception because into the mandate, the British for some reason wrote the Balfour Declaration, which was obviously the promise to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And I think kind of what we're seeing again is now colonial governors, and funnily enough, the first High Commissioner of Palestine, Herbert Samuel, was appointed not because he was Jewish, not because he was an expert, literally because he was a Zionist. A multitude of people have written about his policies and the way in which he instituted a ton of land reforms almost instantaneously. But even Ronald Storrs, who was, I believe, the governor of Jerusalem, he was a British official, he basically said it is crazy to appoint a Zionist. It is like crazy because it will never be fair. And once again, history is repeating itself, where we're seeing like Tony Blair, a guy who's met with Netanyahu, who clearly does not have the best intentions for Palestinians or anyone, to go in and set up some kind of political system in Palestine that, as we've kind of framed it as, is not going to have any space for the Palestinians.
No, it's just another manifestation of the white man's burden. Just the idea that the enlightened Western, predominantly, usually white man, will go over to these backwards, civilized, barbarous states and impose a rule of law over the barbarous populations and enlighten them, bring liberalism or whatever the fuck they want. I mean, like it's something we've seen over and over again for hundreds of years. I don't know why exactly they think this time it'll work, as opposed to all the times that it failed or yielded harmful externalities in the past. But yeah, I mean, what do you think is the most likely outcome here?
The same problems that happened all those years ago, which is Palestinian issues won't be addressed. And I think that the troubling thing is that Trump is perhaps just cloaking his language because he knows that what he's talking about is impractical, that they are getting themselves involved in a quagmire. And so perhaps what will end up happening is they'll just go, you know what, Israel, do what you need to do. And that will either be a full-on resumption of the genocidal killings, because I think Hamas will say, well, you're not addressing our demands. And then Israel will go, well, we've loved this ceasefire. We've been so good in spite of killing hundreds of Palestinians, and then return to mass killing. Or Israel will carry out what it says it wants, which is voluntary migration, which I want to remind people is a euphemism.
Yeah.
It is a euphemism for
expulsion.
mass expelling Palestinians. Yes. There is no such thing as voluntary transfer in a country that or a space that you have decimated social life in. You are expelling people.
Yeah. I mean, even back when Ben-Gurion was a prominent political force in Israel, he prior to the establishment of the state of Israel, he made it clear that for him, when he would use transfer, he was using it as a euphemism for expulsion. That was documented pretty heavily in Nur Masalah's work, The Expulsion of the Palestinians, Concept of Transfer, whatever the subtitle is. But yeah, that's always has been the goal. That always will be the goal. Unless there's complete subjugation of the Palestinians, the only other option is to expel them or kill them, and that's what we've been seeing.
Yeah. Well, how do you make a Jewish majority state in a land that doesn't have a Jewish majority? Like, I'm sorry, all of these, and I think once again, this is why I don't think we should treat Trump's plan as like really all that exceptional, you know? Sure, there are really bizarre elements and oddities, but like even how we've kind of tried to connect this to history, even Jimmy Carter, who perhaps was the best meaning American president in the context of Palestine, Jimmy Carter would hear Menachem Begin enunciate, we're not going to remove the settlements. We have an inalienable right to Judea and Samaria. And he'd go, yeah, we can probably work with him. The only thing that really surprises me is Trump is not has kind of stopped, you know, with the coyness about all of it. Or that he's being more coy about it. That, you know, he's gone from Gaza's a hellhole, war-torn place, and, we're going to need to move everyone out of there, and all of these things, to now all of a sudden talking about how he wants to rebuild Gaza for everyone and make it amazing. But ultimately as well, this is not the Gaza that people knew. This is not the Gaza that people loved. It is not a Palestinian Gaza. It is just like some soulless fantasy of bizarre people from the United States and the UAE and the Gulf and like billionaires who really just support Israel and want to do away with Palestinians because even the idea of a Palestinian state is, you know, terrifying to them because it upsets their authoritarian countries.
And we've spoke off the record about construction being a highly speculative industry. Obviously, you're going to get a whole bunch of people getting very rich off of these reconstruction efforts, and ultimately it just goes back to the point where the Palestinians they're not going to have their political aspirations met. They're going to be sidelined, forgotten, and God forbid in the future something like this happens again where the Israelis decide, it's time to have a massive episode of mowing the lawn, and then we see another massive genocide. So I try to be optimistic and hope that doesn't happen, and hope that more people can clue in and understand exactly what is happening and maybe look into the politics of this situation and pressure our Western governments. But
how do you re-educate because like all of these fantasies like will just re-educate Palestinians, right? How do you re-educate the generation that has experienced the worst Israeli assault in terms of the scale of killing? Like obviously the Nakba as kind of like like a tragedy is probably greater in terms of the scale of what like happened, but in the context of killing, this bout of slaughter is unprecedented in the context of Palestine. We're talking at minimum, it's looking already well over 70,000. Many estimates are placing this in the hundreds of thousands, and I think that you're just kind of expecting Palestinians to not have any thought about like Hamas, Hamas, or even something more militant than Hamas, and Israel will just keep. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Israel will just keep on believing that they can kill and kill and kill their way out of it. But increasingly, Israelis are no longer appreciating that, and they're openly talking about the only viable solution to the Zionist project, which is transfer, because they've denied a Palestinian state. They can't absorb the millions of Palestinians. And so what will they do? Expel.
Yeah. Well, that's a dark way to end the episode, but it's unfortunate and it's reality. So
yeah. And I think in probably another episode we'll kind of talk more about that. And I think it's worth saying that I don't think Palestinians will be passive victims in all of that.
No.
That I think that Palestinians have remained unbelievably steadfast. Hundreds of thousands of people stayed in northern Gaza in spaces where Israel had basically eliminated all life, was cutting off aid, that they existed there. Undeniably.
Incredibly resilient. And the Palestinian resistance has done all it can.
Exactly. And realistically, for facing such a technologically superior enemy in Israel, for being, actually, that is actually supported by most of the large companies in the world with the most advanced surveillance and AI and cloud technologies, coupled with surveillance flights from the US and stuff. Hamas still exist. Israel failed in their goal of destroying them, and I don't think that they will ever be able to efface, not necessarily people's support for Hamas, because Hamas is just a group in the Palestinian liberation movement, realistically, but what they will never be able to efface is the Palestinian desire for liberation. Like, they just won't. It's not going anywhere.
How could it? Their demands haven't changed. They want self-determination, they want statehood, they want dignity. None of those have been allotted to them.
Exactly.
Well, I guess that's all we can say for this episode. Chris and I both appreciate you guys watching. This is the first episode, so we're learning the software, trying to get into the flow of things. We're open to your criticism. Let us know, leave comments, and feel free to suggest topics that you'd like us to cover. Chris, what do you think about building like an intro for the podcast? You know how like there's a little like jingle in some podcasts or a little song that plays in the beginning?
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on getting that guy, the No Politic Here guy? Like maybe we could use his voice, or if we can't use that, like I don't know what the copyright restrictions are, maybe we can get someone to recreate it. Like we can ask people like who can recreate this the best, and then we can use it, and I can like make a song with it or something.
Just find like people who are Israelis to just say no politic here. Maybe I'll just start doing that. I'll just go on the search for getting every Israeli person I've ever met and who's pro-Palestine to say no politic here. And we'll make a collection of that, and that can be our intro. I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode. I hope it wasn't like too meandering, too many topics or anything to that effect. And as Isaac said, we'll iron out kinks, we'll improve, and we're always looking for suggestions because we'll be having guests as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know it's kind of hard to pay attention to everything that's being said with Chris's absolutely beautiful face in the corner there. But I mean, yeah, we'll have guests. We'll see if they can withstand the Kunz, and we'll go from there.
See if they can serve. But yeah, I guess. Oh, and also we're gonna have to come up with an outro as well. Like, how are we gonna end every podcast? Like a few of the ones I listen to end with like over and out, or wait, what's it when they do when they're on walkie talkies? Just go
Roger.
Roger,
yeah.
over. Yeah. So maybe we'll just end with over.
Okay.
Maybe that's the way we'll sort of end the over.
Over. All right, man. Let's do it. Over.
Let's do it. Over. See you next week. Over.